Morning, everyone. Have you ever gone into a restaurant where you can see the available tables and they won't seat your party? Did you ever wonder why? Let me tell you a story. Many months ago, I went into a restaurant, that one in particular, near my home in Colorado. It was a restaurant I've been to before. It's a local burger and all-you-can-eat French fries place. I have 2 teenage sons and a wife that loves French fries. We've been there before. So we went, it was a holiday. That's important in this story. We show up at the restaurant. As you can see, it's not particularly busy. So they immediately seat our party. After about 10 minutes, my younger son said to me, "Dad, the server hasn't come by yet." I was like, "Oh, you're right." And after another 5 minutes, the server finally did come by. And at that point, she took our order and she went away. And we re-engaged in some family conversation. At about 30 minutes, the food showed up. She left it. People started eating all the French fries, with the salty fries, the ketchup. We're getting thirsty. No one comes by to give us water. Generally poor service. About 2/3 of the way through the meal, she finally came by and said, "How's everything going?" And then she started to apologize. She said, "I'm really sorry. There's only 2 of us working this evening. And we had more people show up at the restaurant than we had expected. So we're a little crushed." And she kind of excused it away and she left. At the end of the meal, we got up, we're getting ready to leave, and the manager came over, and he pretty much said the same thing. He goes, "Yeah, I'm sorry, we're really busy tonight, and we just don't have enough people here, so I apologize for the service." And he was trying to excuse it away, and I figured it's time for my kids to really start understanding Scrum. Let me pretend like I'm a Scrum Master, and I'll ask some questions. So the first question I asked him was, when you saw more people showed up than you had server capacity to handle, why didn't you just call in some more servers? And he said, "Well, it's a holiday, so people probably already have other plans, and likely they wouldn't be available." An assumption, of course, that he chose not to validate. So then I asked him the next question. When you had all these people showing up, why did you continue to seat people at the restaurant? And quite honestly, he looked baffled by that question. And he said, remember, it's a chain restaurant, and he's the manager of the local restaurant. And this isn't exactly what he said, but it's a summary. He said, "When I was trained, I was taught if a customer shows up and there's a table, seat the customer. If next customer shows up and there's a table, seat that customer. If the next customer shows up and there's not a table available, quote them how long it'll be before they can get a table, and make it sufficiently short so they'll stay." That last piece was mine, based on experience. So at that point, I said, "Okay, we're done, right? This guy doesn't get it." So get up. As we're leaving, we're putting on our coats, and I noticed there's some other people complaining also about the rather poor service that they got. Let's see if we can interpret this, put it into our context. I would say that this restaurant manager failed to grasp some rather important concepts about how to economically run a restaurant, right? Certainly his profitability that night looked pretty good. I mean, he had a lot of customers come in, so good revenue, low expenses, right? He only had a couple people working, so I bet he was very profitable that night. And he might think his regional manager would show up and say, "Attaboy, great night, great profitability." What he failed to recognize, though, is that he harmed the long-term relationship he had with customers like me. We would go there roughly every 2 weeks. Haven't been back since. Don't want to submit ourselves to that kind of service again. So he failed to look at how his specific actions in the context of what he was doing affected overall long-term. He didn't have an economic framework in place guided by some very core principles. Like, you should really think about the total customer value over the lifetime of the customer rather than any one particular evening. It would have been better off if he had said, "Sorry, sir, we're rather busy tonight, don't have enough servers. Perhaps it'll be 45 minutes before we can seat you, and I understand if you want to leave, here's a 20% off coupon, maybe you'll come back tomorrow night." That would have been a much better idea than to just seat us at the table, because when he sat us at that table, we got poor service. And the problem was much, much worse than that. Not only did we get bad service, everybody else in the restaurant got bad service. I see this a lot. And I'm not talking about restaurants. As Dina said, I could travel a lot. Every week I'm typically with 1 or 2 different companies somewhere around the world, either training or doing coaching. So I get to see a lot of what's working and what isn't working. And I'll visit a lot of companies that are doing very good team level Agile, very good team level Scrum. But yet they're not really getting the benefits that they expect to get as an organization for having adopted Agile. And the fundamental thing I see is that they have failed to grasp some of the core Agile principles that underlie why they're doing what they're doing. They're going through the mechanics quite nicely, but they're still not getting the benefits. And I'd like to show you why. Oops, not too fast. Let's see if we can agree on something. Here's the Scrum framework. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Let me summarize it, because I need to be able to refer to the elements. This is from the visual Agile lexicon that I created when I wrote the book. On the far left side, we have the product owner. That's the fellow with the comb over. Sorry if you're a product owner and you don't have a comb over. But that fellow's got a vision for the product he wants to build. That's the blue cube up here. Now, the blue cube is rather grand, so you're not going to build the entire blue cube in one short duration sprint of a few weeks. So we have to break the blue cube down into smaller pieces through a process called product backlog grooming or product backlog refinement. Right? And the idea behind that is the 3 icons. It's the writing and refining of items for the backlog, like writing and refining user stories, the 2 hands with the ruler sizing them, and the 3rd one, put them in order. So in a sense, we take the blue brick and we break it down into a collection of blue cubes. Those are the smaller feature level items that we'll actually build. The gray looping arrow that dominates the center of the picture, that's a sprint. The first thing that happens in the sprint planning, where we decide which subset of the ready items at the top of that list we're going to pull into the next sprint, right? And these 2 bounding orange arrows define a capacity, and we pull items to reasonably occupy the capacity. Many teams like to use a sprint backlog as a way of acquiring confidence. How do you know that you can get these 3 blue bricks done? Oh, in this picture, green cubes are tasks. Design, build, test, integrate, that type of work. So by having a structure where we're showing the task level work that aligns with each of the stories, we can get a feel, can we get this done or not? Most of our time is spent in sprint execution, where the hands-on design, build, test, integrate work is done. Every day during sprint execution, we perform a daily Scrum, sort of a daily inspect and adapt activity. At the end, we're supposed to have something called a potentially shippable product increment, meaning we build a piece of the blue cube. We didn't build the whole blue cube. Couldn't build the whole blue cube in one short duration sprint of a few weeks, so we built a piece, but that piece needs to be done. And then the last 2 activities in the sprint, both of which are inspect and adapt. The inspect and adapt on the product, the sprint review, and the inspect and adapt on the process, the sprint retrospective. And of course, we come around and do it again, and after we've completed a sufficient number of sprint cycles, then you would actually have the blue cube. And if you were waiting to deploy until you had the full blue cube, you deploy at that point. If it made sense to deploy each of the pieces along the path, you would have done that. Classic Scrum. So I'll visit companies all day long that are doing this, and arguably doing it well, but yet they're still not getting the economic benefit that they expect. Let's see why. I'm going to argue what they're not doing is economically sensible Scrum. So of course I'm going to define what I mean by that. In that Scrum framework picture you looked at, you saw a number of different elements. These are Scrum practices is how I refer to them. Right, there's the 3 roles that you saw, product owner, Scrum Master, development team. There's all the things we just talked about, artifacts like product backlog, sprint backlog, right, potentially shippable increment. Any organization, any team that says to me, we do Scrum, I should be able to walk in and see that stuff. And your company might do it differently than their company, and that's fine, but you're still both doing Scrum. You have to do this if you're claiming you're doing Scrum. How you do some of these things, of course, your approaches might differ. For example, a lot of people use user stories. Not required. User stories are not part of Scrum. It just happens to be a common approach that a lot of teams choose to use. As is planning poker. Again, not required to do Scrum, but a common approach. As is release planning or sprint review. Scrum defines that you have to do a sprint review. It doesn't tell you how to do it. How you do it is your approach. So every organization can have its own approaches. So I'm going to distinguish between practices and approaches. Here's the issue. I know some of you have encountered the term called Scrum Butt. Sorry for the visual. The first time I gave this presentation was at the Scrum gathering in Australia. That picture went over really well in Australia. You usually hear something like this. We do, by the way, I don't know if Scrum Bud is with one T or two Ts. Right? We do Scrum, but our sprints are 8 weeks long, or we don't have a product owner, or we do our daily Scrum every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The part of daily didn't come across there. Right? Or sprint planning takes 2 days. Anybody ever have that happen to them? 2 day sprint planning? Sad that I'm seeing hands go up. Yeah, it happens. Right? And it goes on and on. So the idea is that Scrum Bud is presumably a violation, like not doing one of the core Scrum practices, or maybe having just a totally dreadful approach to doing something. Here's the question though. What if you had no violations? What if you were doing textbook Scrum? Does that mean you'll be successful? And of course the argument I'm making in this presentation is not necessarily. Necessary, not sufficient. You need more than just doing great blocking and tackling, right, at the individual practice and approach level. So, what's causing the problem? As I said, I'm out with companies all the time, and so I'm trying to summarize now what I think are the 3 biggest inhibitors to companies not being successful when applying Scrum, even if they do great team-level Scrum. The first, what I call sort of ignorance or misapplication of the core Agile principles. They understand the mechanics. What they don't understand is the foundation on top of which those mechanics are supposed to operate. They don't have the principles. Hard to inspect and adapt when you don't really understand the core principles of why you're doing what you're doing. The second, they simply don't apply these principles to the full value chain. They might try to apply it in development. I can imagine that a number of you are from larger organizations. If that's true, then you probably brought Agile into development first. What about all the other parts of the organization? What if they're not Agile? Would you not then be disconnected throughout the value chain? We'll examine that. And the third, they fail to structure teams in what I'm going to refer to as an economically sensible way, at scale. I'm talking about a scale, right? If you have a small project with one team, life is good. One Scrum team, one product backlog, what could be better?